Hola, mi nombre es Jesse Leon, and I am the only gay Latino Harvard graduate talking about sex trafficking.
I am Laura Cathcart Robbins, and this is The Only One in the Room, but I am never the only one in this room because, as usual, my boyfriend, producer, and co-host, Scott Slaughter, who I call Hun, is here as well.
Hi, honey.
Hey, Hun.
I want one too.
Jesse's
I want
laughing.
one.
It's pretty nice to have a Hun, Jesse. Jesse. So, Jesse, I met you, was it last year at the San Diego Writers Festival? It must have been, yeah. And you were on a panel, actually. I saw you first on this panel. And I think I was in the second row. The room was packed. And I've been to like 3 or 4 panels that day. Yours was by far the most packed. It was you and Keith Corbin and a couple of other writers. And Marnie Friedman was moderating, which was lovely. Shout out to Marnie. And I sat with my friend Madhushri, who was your friend first before she was my friend. And she was the one who told me, you must meet my friend Jesse. And after you read from your book and after you spoke about your story, first of all, I was in tears. And not that I pitied you, but I was moved by what you were saying. And I was so moved. There was a great deal of compassion in that room, and I felt it. I felt the energy. And the pride with which you tell your story was remarkable to me. And I came home from that conference and I told Scott that I had met you, and I said, we have to get this guy on the show. I've never heard a story like yours, honestly. Certainly not told the way you tell it. So before I let you speak, and we can talk about Madhushri for a moment, I'm just going to introduce you. So Jesse Leon is the author of I'm Not Broken and No Estoy Roto, published by Penguin Random House. He is a Lambda Literary Award finalist. His book was named one of NPR's Best Book of the Year, one of the best books of the year with the San Francisco Chronicle, book Scrolling, and Best Memoir of 2022 by the San Diego Writers Festival, which I am deeply in love with this festival. If you ever get a chance, you should go. I'm sure Jesse will be there because he is a San Diego native. So he is a San Diego-based bilingual author, consultant, and public speaker with a focus on vulnerable communities' access to quality mental health care, substance abuse services, and housing. Say the Spanish of your title again.
Mi libro en español se llama No Estoy Roto.
Roto. No estoy roto. I'll get it. By the end of the interview, awesome. I'll have it. Jesse, thank you. Thank you for coming on the show. Welcome
Thank you, Laura.
To the show.
Thank you, Scott, for having me. It's a pleasure to be here today.
So should we talk about Madhushri first?
Definitely. I light up as soon as I think of Madhu. Definitely.
You call her Madhu?
Madhushri. Yeah.
Yes. She introduced me to another friend of hers who also calls her Madhu. And I was hesitant to shorten her name because of what I read in her book about people shortening her name so that they, when teachers and whatnot, people who didn't know her. But she is the most generous, giving person. When I came down and I had never met her, she invited me, to stay with her. And I had a hotel room, so I actually stayed there, but she cooked for me. I came over to her house and she cooked this amazing feast for the two of us. You've had that experience with her.
Madhushri and I got really close, especially through our TED Talk process. We're both TEDx speakers here in San Diego, and we shared the stage. And every time I would go over a few times a week to practice our TED Talk, she would have this feast. And it just, going to her home just always reminds me of going to my mom's house. where
Yeah.
a lot of barriers are eliminated and people come together around food and conversation. So Madhushri is one of my most favorite people. Amazing, amazing author. Love her books. An amazing public
Yes.
speaker. And as you said, very giving. And I love that she just continues and continues to give and make herself available from a place of love, compassion, empathy for others, especially writers of color in this space.
Yes. Yes. You said it so well. Thank you for that. Madhushri Ghosh is who we're talking about. I forgot to say her last name in case you want to look her up, which you should. Um, all right. So your story has so many layers, and I'm I want to really focus in on your life kind of in two parts. Um, your life, like I said, as a young man, as a boy, as a kid, when what we're going to discuss happened to you, and then how you dealt with that and how you lived through that. And then I want to talk about your life as a man, a male adult who decided, instead of abandoning his past, to go forward and bring it to light and
Yeah.
educate people about it. Um, which I have incredible
Thank you.
admiration for. I'm so happy you're here. You know, this is like one of those things. I don't want that many stories on the show. I get pitched a lot of stories and I'm like, "Oh, okay, that might be good." I really wanted yours. And anyway, so I'm
Thank
happy you're
you.
here. So I was looking up, I wanted to start with a definition of human or sex trafficking. And I'm saying human or sex trafficking. Are they one and the
No,
same?
they're not.
They're
The
not.
federal government categorizes the two main areas of human trafficking as sex trafficking and labor trafficking. So the
Okay. And how do you identify?
so the legal definition, as you just said, of human trafficking is a recruitment, transportation, harboring, or receipt of persons by means of the threat or use of force or other forms of coercion, abduction, of fraud, of deception, of the abuse of power, or or of a position of vulnerability, or of the giving or receiving of
Mm,
payment of benefits to achieve the consent of a person having control over another person for the purpose of exploitation. And so the federal government, especially the Victims Protection Act of 2000, recognizes and defines two primary forms of human trafficking: sex trafficking and labor trafficking. And so for me, the definitions that work for me as a survivor are: human trafficking is a crime involving the exploitation of a person for labor, services, or commercial sex. Labor trafficking are individuals compelled to work or provide services through the use of force, fraud, or coercion. Sex trafficking are individuals that are compelled to engage in commercial sex through the use of force, fraud, or coercion. However, which is key here, when a person under 18 years old is induced to perform a commercial sex act, it is a crime, regardless of whether there is any force, fraud, or coercion.
wow. Yeah.
Yeah,
As it
as it
should
should.
be a crime. Yeah. And commercial sex is simply sex that is paid for. Is that
So
correct?
in this instance, is there was a study done by the state of Minnesota that I highlight a lot in my presentations around sex trafficking, and in particular around men and boys and members of the Two Spirit LGBTQ plus community. There was a study done in Minnesota of high school students, and they found that 5,000 high school students in Minnesota across zip codes, which was very telling, and across socioeconomic class, had engaged in some form of trading something of value for sex. And by that same
Okay.
definition, trading something of value for sex is considered human trafficking of someone under the age of 18. That is a ride, a cup of coffee from Starbucks, a place to sleep on a couch, which oftentimes happens
Mm-hmm.
for teens that have been thrown out from their homes and living in the streets. Anything of monetary value um, for sex is considered trafficking for anyone that is under 18 years of age. So in my instance, having gone through what I went through and getting clean and sober at 18 years old, by the legal definition of today, I was trafficked from 11 years old until I was 18 years old.
Wow. 11 years old. Um, Thank you for that. Thank you. It brings to mind a young woman that Scott and I know through our recovery community who was allowed to sleep on a member's sofa in
Mm.
exchange for sex. And we didn't have a name for it then. We just knew it was wrong. But your definition
Yeah,
fits there. So I really appreciate you giving that a clear
thank you.
definition. So your website, which is wonderful, by the way, everybody should go right to your website and check it out. It says Jesse Leon's childhood was violently ruptured. A dangerous and harrowing encounter at a local gift shop when he was 11 years old left Jesse with a deadly secret, hurt, alone, and scared for his life. Jesse numbed his pain by losing himself in the hypermasculine culture of the streets and wherever else he could find it in alcohol, drugs, and prostitution. Can you tell us what happened in that gift shop?
Yeah, thank you for that overview. And since my book came out, I've this is a learning process, and there's terms throughout the book that I've had to come to terms with after publication, like sex work, like prostitution. That the reality was I was under 18, and even though I turned to the commercial sex trade of the streets to support my drug habit, the reality was, based on the legal definition, I was a sexually exploited child. Even though in my own eyes, I was making more money than my mom, who was the school lunch lady, and I was making more money than her to help with the rent and everything else, the reality was I was a sexually exploited child. So at the age of 11, I normally wear a shirt of little Jesse. I'll send you some images. Hopefully, we can put them on the podcast. The I was 11 years old. I was a loving, nerdy, caring kid. I
Mm.
It was a hot summer day between sixth and seventh grade, and my brother, we were having a water bucket fight or wetting each other with the water hose in our little apartments. And they put their money together and sent me to buy water balloons. And I went to this gift shop to buy some water balloons. And I'm an 11-year-old kid. And I asked the shopkeeper, "Excuse me, do you have any water balloons?" And he tells me that he does and that they're in the back storage room. And so I go to the back storage room to find these water balloons. And my mama raised me right. I'm not going to open up boxes that I wasn't given permission to open. So I'm looking and I'm excited. Like, they gave me, the nerdy one, the responsibility to buy water balloons. And I want to make sure I get the best water balloons for the kids in the apartment, right? I don't want to let them down. And so I'm looking in the storage room trying to find the water balloons and I can't find them. And so I go to turn around to ask the shopkeeper if I can open the boxes. And he's standing in the doorway. And I was sexually abused violently. I was threatened and was told that if I didn't return within 2 days, he would find out where I lived, kill me, and kill my family. And I believed him. And so I was scared. And I went back. About a month into it, him and another individual started drugging me and started inviting other men into the gift shop. So by the time I was 14, when the authorities got involved, there were more than 900 sexual encounters by force for me by the time I was 11 to 14 years old in the local community gift shop without my parents knowing. Yeah.
Wow. As the mother of sons, the heartbreak that I feel when I hear you tell that story, the desire to do everything in my possible to keep them safe. It just shatters something in my heart when I hear you say that. I want to talk about your mom and how she responded once this was once this came to light, but and how it came to light actually I think is also really interesting. But can you tell me, and I just want to make sure that I take a second to honor what you said, because it's a very vulnerable story to tell, and I appreciate you sharing that with us and with the world. I know that we're not the first place you've shared this story, but I would imagine that you have made a decision to share this vulnerability in order to help other people. So I really appreciate that.
Thank you. Thank you so much for saying that, because even though I'm in recovery 31 years in March, even though I do step work, and even though I have a sponsor and I sponsor people and I've done my own healing journey, every time you talk about it, it does bring up this feeling, one, of hope and resilience and strength and gratitude. So sometimes when I cry, if I cry during this interview, it's probably coming from a place of hope and a place of gratitude that I'm no longer living the way I was. And I'm not reliving or remembering through reliving the situations. In retrospect, in my culture, Latino culture, and I remember when my dad left the house and the messaging of, you're the man of the family, me and my brother. You're telling an 11, 12-year-old kid that it's his job to be the man of the family. You're the protector. And so I try to tell parents that one of the most beautiful and impactful things that you can ever tell a child is, you can speak to me about anything. If anyone ever threatens you with threatening us as your parents, you don't have to feel that you need to protect us. It's our job to protect you as a parent. So even though someone threatens you with hurting us, please come to us. It's okay. I don't care how much you believe the threats. Please come to us. And when you're raised, as I was, in that generation of gang violence, drive-by shootings, the pinnacle of gang violence during those years, late 80s, early 90s, there was a lot of threats to individuals' families. If I couldn't find you, Laura, I'd go after your brother, your mom, your dad. And that was the reality of the culture in the inner cities, especially here in the West Coast. But I really wish that, not coulda, woulda, shoulda. I try to carry that message of what would I have liked to have happened differently. Because when I told my mom and I saw the pain in her face and I saw her concern and then the anger come out, I felt responsible for causing that pain. And even though my mom did the best she could to put her arms around me, as soon as my little 14-year-old brain heard her say, "Why didn't you come to me sooner?" I felt that the blame was being placed on me. It wasn't her intention. I know that. My mom went to the 5th grade in Mexico. She worked 2 to 3 jobs to put food on the table. Sometimes in those moments, you, Laura, you, Scott, as a parent, it's hard to find those right words that your 11, 12, 13, 14-year-old child will be able to comprehend what you're saying. And so I have to give grace to my parents, to my mom, that she did the best she could. What I heard, though, at 14, when she said, "Why didn't you come to me sooner?" was, "It's your fault for not telling me." When I felt all this anger and rage of, well, I'm being told I got to be the man of the house. It's my job to protect you as the woman in the home. It doesn't matter that you're the parent or not. I'm the man, you're the woman. It's my job to protect you. And as a child, I don't think any child should ever feel that brunt of responsibility on their shoulders of having to be the protector. A child should be allowed to be a child. and enjoy childhood.
Well, and I feel so much in what you just said, but I feel that that's what you're doing now, is you are the voice reaching out to protect those children, in that, do not put this on you. This is not on you. What's happening is not on you. And that permission to tell the adults that love them. Maybe it's not their parent. Maybe it's a grandparent. Maybe it's an auntie. Maybe it's but whoever the adult is that's in that person's life, that child's life, who loves them, you're giving them permission to tell right away.
And
And that, and I think also, I'm sorry I interrupted you, but for me, if I heard that when I was a kid, I want to protect my parents, of course, because I love them. But I would also know, if anything happened to them, where am I? If something happens to them, what's going to happen to me? So it's also protecting myself. And the secret probably felt like the best way to do that. Keeping that secret felt like
well,
the
in my
best way.
situation, when I was in 7th grade, and the abuse started the summer between 6th and 7th. So a few months into the trafficking, and I talk about it in my book, I'm Not Broken. There's a chapter in there about how 7th grade for me, I spent most of 7th grade high. And I started making friends through getting high. And I had this false sense of courage to not go back to the store. Maybe he's lying. He can't find out where I live. To one day in the evening see my trafficker outside of our apartments, pointing to his watch. And I could still see it like it was yesterday. He was leaning on a fire hydrant across the street. And when I went back to the store the next day, the message was very clear. And he told me he spoke to my mom. And I remember getting so defensive. You're not going to hurt my mom. You're not going to hurt my mom. And I got beat up brutally behind it. And so the threat was really real. And that occurs a lot in our communities, where what happened in my case is that even when I reached out for help, you think no one's going to believe you. And so when you start being questioned, interrogated in a sense, of the alleged incident, that you may be lying to get yourself out of trouble for another situation, and you're reaching out for help. And then once you get that intervention, there is no help for you or the secondary survivors. In this case, the chosen family, our parents, our siblings, our loved ones. So sometimes you're left with, why did I bother reaching out for help?
Right. That completely makes sense. That's horrifying that your trafficker showed up at your home. And the fact that you got beat up as a result of that. I keep going back to what you said about this nerdy little kid that was excited to bring home the best water balloons, who lost his innocence that day, right? Literally. But also, did the nerdy little kid go away that day?
I love little Jesse. And I refer to him as little Jesse, even though it's me. And I can now light up with a huge smile when I think about little Jesse. Because he was a Mexican alfalfa. He would spin around in circles after a Wonder Woman episode because Linda Carter was Mexican. And I wanted to be Wonder Woman. And my mom loved me for it. We didn't have the Anthony Bourdains. We didn't have Chef Corbin. I was helping my mom in the kitchen. Now that's a positive thing. But back then, if you're a boy, especially a boy of color, helping your mom in the kitchen, there's something wrong with you. You need to be playing football, basketball, fixing cars and bikes. But little Jesse just loved helping mom. And he did go away. I locked him away. I made sure that I blamed little Jesse, and I blamed my mom. And I vowed to make my mom's life a living hell for bringing me into this world. because I felt that it was her love of accepting me for being a little good student with my welfare government glasses, literally hair parted to the side. I can't wait to send you the images.
I can't wait to see
Um,
them.
I wish I would have been like my brother, the masculine Chicano from the barrio who knows how to fight, who plays football, basketball. He's one of the guys, always the first one picked. I was always the last one picked, or never picked at that, and just watching a game from the sidelines. Always on the outside looking in because it wasn't okay to be a nerd. We didn't have an Urkel back then. We didn't have a Manny from Modern Family. We didn't have a Cheese from, Reservation Dogs. And I love Little Jesse. The original title of my book, I'm Not Broken, was going to be Nerd. And it was an acronym for me: Never Ending Resilience Determination, Nerd. But we changed the title. And part of the reason I do a lot of my public speaking and what I do is to let parents know that it's okay to be a nerd. It's okay to be in the kitchen helping moms. And all the dads out there should just love their kid regardless of who they are and let them be the best little Jessies they can be. Whether or not they fall into this preconceived notion that we have because of our generation about what a boy should and should not be. And my mom did the best she could.
Yes, she did. Yes, she did. And that's evident in your writing and how you speak of her. I want to jump to you ended up in the system with, I don't remember what the incident was that got you. You were in juvenile?
No.
No, you were, where were you?
I got in ninth grade, I was 14 years old and I got in a really bad fight in school. And during the fight, this kid who was bigger than me had beat up a friend of mine. And my friend was maybe 5'2". And I was always a big guy. So I was around 5'10" at the time. And this kid was around 6'1". And I know now that I was having an incomprehensible reaction to a situation because my emotions and my reasoning were out of balance. And there was no one around to help me get my emotion and my reasoning back into play to talk me down from the ledge that I was on. And I was angry. No one said, if you were there, Laura, you didn't say, yo, little homie, what's up, dog? Why don't we go talk over here? You seem a little upset right now, Holmes. Talk to me. What's going on? What did this situation bring up for you? Why are you so angry? Nah, man, because he beat up our friend and it's not fair. I want to protect him. I became a protector. Not all hurt people hurt people. Some of us become protectors. I went about it the wrong way. And I was being egged on by all the other students. Oh, go mess him up, eh? Go mess him up. Go F him up. And I did. And I blacked out. And the kid was sent to the ICU. And I was looking at some jail time. And
I'm sorry, can you just slow down the blackout for people who haven't experienced that? What did that feel like for you then?
The blacking out started as soon as the physical exchange occurred and my rage took over. All I could see was the faces, not just of my perpetrator and the individual who caused me sexual harm and was trafficking me, and the other person that was working with him, but the hundreds of men that I was forced to have sex with. So as I'm in this fight, all I could see was faces of all these men. And all this rage was coming out. And this poor, I'm not going to say poor innocent, but this kid I was in a fight with became the focal point of all that rage and anger, where I didn't see him.
Yes.
I was just hitting and punching and punching and punching because I was in my mind fighting all these men that were just, the faces were flashing in front of me. And I came to when I felt myself being slammed onto the floor and handcuffs being put on me by the school police officers.
Right. And you were crying at that
No, I
point, right?
wasn't.
You
I
were
wasn't at
sobbing.
all. I
Oh, you
wasn't
weren't?
crying at that point. I remember being dragged. I remember coming to as I'm being slammed on the floor and the handcuffs put on me, and then being dragged like on my tiptoes to the principal's office. And I was stoic.
Mm.
I was stoic. I was breathing heavily. I was covered in blood, handcuffed to a chair. And the school police officer is like, "What's going on with you, Jesse? This isn't like you. You're a troublemaker, but not like this. What's happening?" And I was stoic. "What's wrong?" "Nothing." And I remember everything was yes, no, nothing, a nod. And he said, "You could be looking at some jail time." They had gotten a hold of the kid's parent, and she wanted to press charges, and the kid was in the hospital. And that's when I started crying. Not because I was afraid to get incarcerated. I didn't want to hurt no one the way that I did. And I caused physical pain to another individual, and I never wanted to hurt anybody. I just wanted to protect my friend. And in doing so, I hurt somebody else. And so that's where the crying started. That guilt, that horrible guilt of like, oh my God, I hurt somebody, and his mom is there with him in the hospital, and he's in ICU. And I remember when I told the police officer, "I'm sorry, I blacked out, I'm sorry." All I could see is the faces of all those men. He was confused. It's like, "What men are you talking about, Jesse?" "Those men, those men, those effing men that are forcing me to have sex with other men." And it just started coming out. And I felt safe with this police officer. Thank God he was Latino. Thank God he understood my culture. And I didn't feel that he judged me because he had built rapport with us as little wannabe gang members in the school. And so he left me there. Principal and him were coming in and out. Next comes in this social worker who starts questioning me. And they told me that I had to repeat the same story over to the social worker in front of the principal. And that's when the interrogation and not being believed started. So where you feel that, why did I bother opening up? And so the kid's mom, miracle number one, many miracles, but miracle number one, she agreed that she wouldn't press charges if I could show that I was getting help. And so the social worker of the school said they were going to place me in the victim witness program. And when I heard that word victim, I was full of rage again. I don't want to be no victim, but that's the legal terminology. I want to feel empowered. And so they sent me home with a giant stack of papers for my mom to sign to get me into this victim protection program so that I can get the help that I need. And that should have been miracle number two and my saving grace, but it wasn't. The system was not available. Programs and services were not available for survivors, let alone for men and boy survivors from a Latino community, nor for me, nor for my family.
Do you not use the word victim?
I do.
No. I hear you
I
say
do
survivor.
use victim in presentations because of the legal definition behind it. And so, yes, I will use the term victim when it comes to definitions that are required by law. There's so much contradiction of what term to use, what not to use. I use survivor. I used, lived experience expert. I use surthriver. But there's a lot more to me than just the sex abuse and the trafficking. I'm a survivor of poverty, of coming from the communities that we sometimes come from. We're all survivors. And so, but in this term, around human trafficking, I use the term survivor. I try not to complicate it for myself. It just is what it is. The hard part for me is when it comes to describing the perpetrator, because I do believe in restorative justice. And there is a movement around using terms like the individuals that cause sexual harm. And I still struggle with that in honesty and full transparency, because I do believe in restorative justice and second chances. However, they were perpetrators.
Right. I was just going to say, when you talk about restorative justice, what I hear is you're talking about what wasn't available to you at the time that the incident occurred, where you were in the altercation with that other young boy. It wasn't what's going on with you. Why are you angry? Why did you do this? It was jump to the conclusion that there's a victim and a perpetrator, right? And so restorative justice would have done what in that case, so that people can understand what restorative justice is?
Restorative justice would have been what the kid's mom did, and said, I recognize that this person is hurting. And yes, he hurt my son. And I will not press charges if we can engage in services to help him so he doesn't hurt somebody else, as opposed to me getting locked up and being in a situation where just being in that situation. And so that's why I say that's miracle number one.
It is. It is absolutely. I mean, especially during the time you're talking about, but even now, there are very little resources being put into communities like the one you're describing, like the communities where I grew up, that allow for that type of thing to take place. It is a quick to lock up, quick to condemn, quick to judge.
Right now, the hard part is that there's a lot of resources being pumped into providing housing and resources for individuals that have caused sexual harm, so that the harm does not get repeated. And I'm not criticizing that. I think those resources are needed. However, there's very little resources for survivors. There's very little resources to help all survivors. And one of the things that I say on my TED Talk is we can learn a lot from our sisters in this movement, that women and girls have played a very key role in lifting up these issues, from the Me Too movement to others, to ensure that other individuals don't experience the harm that we did. And that is risky. We do that and we speak up, and there's a place of vulnerability, and it's a decision to speak up, and sometimes to our own professional detriment.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to talk a little bit more about that, because I want to be mindful of the time we have. And I want to, you mentioned that you've been sober for 31 years in March, which is, I snapped when you said that. I don't know if y'all could hear me, but yes, Jesse. You got sober
18.
when you were how old? 18 years old.
And my
You went to UC Berkeley.
My life changed.
Your life changed. Look at the smile on your face. It's so
Thank
beautiful.
God for sponsorship. Thank God for finding a community of people that, regardless of age, race, sexual identity, religious beliefs, I just put their arms around me and loved me for Jesse, and showed me that a whole world was possible and could open up for me. Because sometimes when you ask, how can I help you? What can I do? The best thing you can tell a survivor, a victim of trafficking or abuse, is, I believe you. Because sometimes when you ask, what can I do to help? I didn't know what was even available. It was people in recovery that taught me that I could change therapists. No one told me. No one told my mom. It's like the state said, "Hi, how are you doing, Mrs. Leon, Jesse? Is it going well for you in therapy? Because if it's not, we can find you another therapist that you can work with." How does a child go from 14 to 18 years old in weekly, sometimes 2 therapy sessions per week, down the rabbit hole of drug addiction, substance abuse, the sexual exploitation on the streets, living the life that I lived, homeless, walking Santa Monica Boulevard, Hollywood Boulevard, all the while going to therapy? That therapist dropped the ball. And that should not occur to anyone, but it does. And so what people in recovery taught me was, you could change therapists, demand it. So I did. You can go to school.
And you found someone
I did.
who
I did.
helped.
I found another therapist, and that therapist stayed with me until I got into UC Berkeley, and then at Berkeley.
So
Go ahead.
I'm sorry, I'm like
Oh,
jumping
no,
the gun
go
because I
ahead. Go
really
for it.
want to hear about how this nerdy kid who all this stuff happened to, who was not put into the system, but he was put into the social work
Mhm.
system to go into therapy, presumably to help. The therapy was not
Right.
helpful, found himself in the recovery community and held in that community. How does that kid go to UC Berkeley, which is, is it the most prestigious public
It
school
it
in the
is the
world?
number one public serving institution in the country right now. Public.
It
So
is.
how did
My daughter goes
yeah.
there, actually.
Yes.
And I'm so proud of her.
Yes. Tell us how that happens,
And I
Jesse.
just did the keynote. I did the commencement speech for the Latino graduation, for the fall graduation
No
for Latino
way.
students at UC Berkeley. I can't
Shut
wait to
up.
post it.
Oh my
It was a
gosh.
beautiful topic, and it was planting the seeds for our future. And
Yes. Yes, planting the
how does a
seeds.
child go from? How did I go from being homeless and trafficked to going to UC Berkeley? I saw other people in community college doing it that were also in recovery. My story's not unique. There's a lot of us that have experienced what I went through, men and women, and non gender binary and LGBTQ two-spirit individuals. It's just rarely talked about. But when I would see someone like Alora walking from one class to another, and there's that nod of acknowledgement, like, I see you, you got this, keep going to class, you good, I'll see you at a meeting later tonight. And people taught me that it wasn't a race. It took me 4 years to get my associate's degree and 1 year beauty school. So I did hair when I was at Cal. I did hair on Telegraph. I did hair in my apartment.
Hey.
I became an expert at black hair. I used to do finger waves and updos and the hot stove and the hot comb, the curling iron, I was good.
Ooh, Jesse, the silky
Yeah,
press.
exactly. And so it wasn't a race, but it was in community college where the teachers seemed to care and asked engaging questions. It was in community college that I saw for the first time their eyes were watching, not eyes on the prize. Where I read for the first time, their eyes were watching God. Maya Angelou, Rain of Gold by Victor Villaseñor. The House on Mango Street by Sandra Cisneros. It was in community college that this nerd started coming back out again, and this joy for learning, and people in recovery, and the community college counselors at EOPS encouraging me to stay in school, even after I got my cosmetology license, and encouraging me to study abroad. I remember when I first heard that term, it was the EOPS counselor, and she said, you're going to apply to 10 schools. Not where do you want to apply to, or will you apply? You're going to apply to 10 four-year universities to transfer. I said, okay. And when you get there, wherever one you go to, you're going to ask about study abroad. I'm like, what study abroad? Like study a female abroad? What do you mean? I don't get it. That's where my head was, right? And so she said, no, like study abroad, like away, or going abroad. And I'm like, oh, okay, Holmes. And I lived in Spain for a year. And I was able to travel to all these
Amazing.
places where nerdy little Jesse would read about in National Geographic magazines and get lost. I'm actually visiting these places. Recovery and people in recovery and people around me made that possible for
Mm.
me.
I love that so much. I love everything about that story. I love that you did black hair while you were in college. That is just the best. Tell me how then you got to Harvard. What was that journey like?
So I was at UC Berkeley and I started organizing with African American woman leader who you've probably heard about, Angela Davis. We started we
Oh my
started
God.
there was a
Yeah.
group of us that started organizing around prison industry and mandatory sentencing and the increases of incarceration of black and brown men in particular here in California. And so we had the first conference ever called Critical Resistance at UC Berkeley, where she coined the term prison industrial complex. And so my focus was criminal justice policy. And so when I got clean and sober, I started doing work around HIV in communities of color. So my undergraduate thesis at UC Berkeley, which we're required to do, was on the spread of HIV in the US prison system. I wanted to merge my work in criminal justice and HIV work in communities of color. And I was given an opportunity to study in Cuba. I did HIV research in La Habana, also mentioned in my book, I'm Not Broken and No Estoy Roto. And I wasn't going to apply to graduate school. I wanted to move back to San Diego, get a job teaching in juvenile hall, and trying to inspire incarcerated youth to live their best life and read the books that inspired me that I mentioned previously. And it was mentors like Pedro Noguera. It was mentors that and other students that inspired me to apply for a master's degree program. But that meant going to get a GRE. I'm like, what's a GRE? What's a GRE? I don't know what that is. And they walked me to the financial aid office. They got me a fee waiver for a GRE course. And next thing you know, I did the GRE. I applied to 10 schools and I got into Harvard and I applied. And I tell people, just apply. The worst thing they could say is no. The worst thing they could say is no. So what? It's not a reflection on me. And so I only got to Harvard because there were so many angels, so many people that came into my life and just asked me, how are you doing with your graduate school applications? Hey, what graduate school are you applying to? When are your applications due? So, because otherwise I wouldn't have done it.
Amazing. And what I'm hearing is because I know so many young people who are kind of at that crossroads that you were describing, where their life is about alcohol or drug abuse, and they don't want to get sober because they feel like their life will be over. They will be forever on the outside looking in. And what I'm hearing you describing is that, like, if recovery was a bus, you got on at 18 and it took you all the way to Berkeley and then to Harvard and then to the rest
Not
of your
only
life.
that, but I tell people all the time, and I'm a speaker in recovery. Like I'm speaking in a few weeks at a major convention in Texas. And you know, I tell people my life opened up. I thought it was gonna be boring. Like, damn, Holmes, I'm 18 years old. I ain't trying to be like these old people all up in here drinking coffee and smoking cigarettes and hanging out at Denny's every day eating apple pie after a meeting. I'm 18. I want to have a different life. I want to be young and I want to go clubbing and dancing. But I did. I just took some time My first year in recovery was focused on me and my recovery and changing people, places, and things. That doesn't mean that my first night in Berkeley, which I talk about in my book, a bunch of people in recovery met me at the dorm that I was staying at, took me out to a meeting, and then we went dancing to 3 or 4 nightclubs. I got back to the dorm at 6 in the morning after having breakfast of a night of just crazy dancing and having a good time with people in recovery. I didn't have to get high or get drunk. And people in recovery that were also young in recovery taught me that it's okay to get clean and sober young. I mean, I love dancing. I want to go to Ibiza and hear my favorite DJ, Black Coffee, and dance to some deep Afro house music until 6 a.m. in Ibiza with other people in recovery. Why not?
Why not? Why not? And black coffee. Is it hot
Black
coffee or black
Coffee.
coffee?
I love him as a DJ.
Black coffee. Oh my gosh, I love that. You are such an activist. You're an activist for so many different communities, for the recovery community, for the LGBTQ plus community. Tell me about Two Spirit. You're the first person I've heard say that. Tell me what
So
that
Two
means.
Spirit is a term that the Native community and individuals from the LGBTQ plus community that are Native have adopted a term called Two Spirit. Many of us in our cultures, I identify as Indigenous. I'm a Latino of Indigenous descent. Both sides of my parents' families come from tribes in Mexico. And so Two Spirit is a term that is used to honor those in Indigenous cultures that were revered, that were respected, that were the medicine carriers of our communities. That some Native traditions believe that there's up to 7 genders and 7 different ways to identify individuals. And so for me, Two Spirit, I use it as honoring both my male and female energies, the dualities, which represents a whole different person in essence. And so what you'll find is you'll find the term LGBTQ plus or LGBTQ Two Spirit. By having Two Spirit on the front, it's honoring for me the the Two Spirit community within the LGBTQ movement, and calling that out.
Yeah, thank you. I'm in awe. I wanted to name all the ways in which you're an activist, but we're out of time. But I'll just say really quickly, for the Latino community, for the LGBTQ plus Two Spirit community, for the HIV, people living with HIV, people in the prison system, people who were survivors of human trafficking or survivors of human trafficking, all of those things, I want to thank you for your service. It is incredibly beautiful that you have dedicated your life to this.
I am doing the best that I can, and that's the best I can do, and I'm doing it. I got accepted into the Bellagio residency program funded by the Rockefeller Foundation, which is extremely prestigious.
What?
To be able, I'm raising funds to be able to conduct research to identify the gaps, the existing services for survivors, in particular of the Latino and Indigenous communities, the gaps that exist in providing culturally responsive, multilingual, gender affirming, trauma informed care to help survivors move from surviving to thriving. And in order to do so, I'm trying to create the resources so that the organizations on the ground doing this work are not struggling to pay their bills, that we can help more survivors, because I'm not unique. I may think I am, but we all belong in institutions like Harvard, Yale, Princeton's of the world, Stanford's of the world. Or if I want to be the best electrician, that I belong there too. And that opportunities should be made available to survivors because we are smart people. and people didn't give up on me.
And you also belonged in your mama's
Yes,
kitchen.
queen. I belonged in my mama's
Yes.
kitchen.
You did. My oldest son, I wish I cooked, but I don't. But he started cooking for me at age 10. And now he's a chef. And that's what he did. And that's how he experiences the world, is through food. So when you were saying that, I was picturing my son in the kitchen at that age, just being in his essence. Just, yes,
Oh
I
my
love that.
gosh. Thank you.
Last thing I will say,
for loving your son and for just that blossoming of an individual. Awesome.
I do. I love him for that. I support him for his uniqueness and his passion. That is all just, I want to eat it all up. And I do eat up the cooking. Last thing, the second to last thing, when I watched your TedxTalk, which was incredible, you broke down more than once, and there was a moment of silence, and then this uproarious, heartfelt applause from the audience. And I wanted to know how that felt in that moment.
I watched that over and over again. And there was a moment where little Jesse, I just felt that he was like on stage, scared, and froze and wanted to cry and wanted to reach out for help. And I was just kind of there, like frozen. It wasn't that I forgot my words. I was just, the emotion came out and the fear of not being loved. And telling this story from a male perspective in front of other men. And then all of a sudden someone screams out, "We love you," and starts applauding. And I just felt that little Jesse like lift his head up again and just shine with light and love. And all the love came in and I just picked it back up. And that was beautiful.
It was beautiful to watch. When they started applauding, I just couldn't help it. I welled up watching it, and I actually stopped it at that moment and like took a breath and then rejoined you in the talk to feel how it went.
Look at me. I can't stop smiling. And it's that genuine smile that
yes. It's the little Jesse smile. We're going to get the picture so you guys can see it. Jesse, tell our listeners how they can find you. I mentioned your website, so tell them what that is.
The website is Jesse Leon Author, JesseleLeonAuthor.com. That's the best way to get a hold of me and my speaker bureaus who manage a lot of my public speaking. I'm also a consultant for philanthropy on issues of affordable housing and substance abuse, mental health, and human trafficking. Doing some amazing projects across the country to build more affordable housing for our communities, which is definitely needed. And some of that will be made public within the next couple of months of who I'm working with. And so best way to get a hold of me also is on social media, Jesse Leon Author. And I try to keep it as simple as that. I do respond to everyone that reaches out. And I really do. I really do.
Yeah,
I know what it's like to feel alone in this space, and I do my best to reach out. If you took the time to message me, then I feel it's my duty from a place of love, empathy, and compassion to at least say thank you and acknowledge that you took the time to reach out.
Thank you for that. Thank you for all of that. Thank you for this beautiful talk. I knew it was going to be gorgeous. I didn't know how rich it would be, and I really appreciate it.
I just hope I didn't talk too much. So thank you, Laura, and thank you, Scott, for this opportunity.
I don't think you can talk enough.
Yes, right? Right, hon? More. We're right? Like the TEDx audience. We want more Jesse. Thank you. Thank you, Jesse.
Thank you, Jesse, for having me here.